Welcome to Novara Live. Coming up tonight, Nigel Farage has unveiled Reform UK's new shadow cabinet, and there are a few familiar faces. Keir Starmer is on his 14th humiliating U-turn. Labour peer John Mann has accused the Green Party of antisemitism, and Hilary Clinton claims the Trump administration is covering up the Epstein Files. I'm Aaron Bastani, and tonight I'm joined by Kieran Andrieu. Kieran, how are you?
Aaron, Shrove Tuesday. What's your favourite pancake filling?
I'd love to say Nutella, but I'm too old. I'm too old to be eating that many calories. So it's going to have to be virtuous. I'm saying maple syrup.
Very good. I'm not great with this stuff, but I think you're never too old. But nobody comes to me for fitness advice, so...
You've also got a naturally slim face. Some of us, sadly, aren't blessed with such things. If you enjoy our news coverage here on Novara Live, then you'll love the way our brilliant articles team delve into the wide range of news we can't always cover on this show. They do a brilliant job. So if you'd like a selection of our very best articles delivered into your inbox every Wednesday, sign up to our newsletter, The Pick. Head to novara.media/The Pick to get it in your inbox tomorrow. Reform is flying high in the polls still. In the last few weeks, pollsters have put Nigel Farage's troops between 5 and 10 points clear of the rest. In Scotland, they're consistently polling in second. In Wales, it's the same story. Those are the two historic heartlands of the Labour Party. And Keir Starmer's Labour is third in both. All the available evidence indicates that as things stand, Reform will challenge Labour to form the next government after that general election, whenever it may come. But back to 2026, and the reality is that Reform only has 8 MPs, 4 of which were elected as Reform candidates in the last general election. Forget the Reform campaign bus, they could all fit in a Vauxhall Corsa, which means there's a big gap between expectations and reality, at least for now. And as a result, Farage is constantly trying to make Reform look like a government in waiting. He'll take any chance he can to make that point. So this morning, he announced his shadow cabinet. Before doing that, Farage outlined his thinking on the matter.
There is no question, given that we've now led for the last 200 opinion polls in a row, given that our average lead is between 9 and 10%, that in the country we are the voice of opposition to this government. And so it's time for the party to take the next step. Too often, the criticism over the last 20 months has been that we're a one-man band, to which I generally respond by saying, well, it's better than being a no-man band. But the time has come to broaden the party, to put in place people in shadow positions, and that process begins today, just begins today, with 4 important announcements. There are 3 things really that we're looking for when it comes to appointing people to positions, to speak officially on behalf of the party. 1 is the youthful energy and enthusiasm that reformers who've never been in government before have. The second thing we're looking for is genuine experience, because people like Richard Tice and myself, we've not been in number 10, we've never been on the front line. We need people who've been there and who know how it works, or perhaps more accurately, how and why it doesn't work. And then we'll be looking, and we started this process last year, and it's going on today. We then need people who are genuine experts in their area to take junior ministerial positions, because frankly, the lack of real-world experience in government is being felt by every business in the land.
In a matter, I was so distracted by how terrible that shirt was. Anyway, in a manner befitting Reform, they made up these slick social media graphics too, and you can also see what jobs various individuals have. Shadow cabinet, you've got 4 figures there, as Farage mentioned. Robert Jenrick, Bobby J, or Bobby Zempic, as I like to call him. Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, Zia Yusuf, Shadow Home Secretary. Suella Braverman, Shadow Education and Skills. And then Richard Tice is Deputy PM, and also shadowing business, trade and energy. It'll be a super ministry he'll head up in any potential Reform government. Now, it's important to say that these guys aren't the actual shadow cabinet. After all, the shadow cabinet is a group of senior members of the main opposition party. Their job is to shadow or mirror the actual ministers in the cabinet. It's an important means of holding any government accountable. Despite their impressive polling, you may have noticed Reform aren't the official opposition. If the whole of Reform's parliamentary party wanted to shadow the government, they'd need at least 3 times the MPs they presently have. Cabinet is generally around 25 people, and as already mentioned, Reform has 8 MPs. So why is Farage doing this? Well, one theory, which he hinted at this morning, is that among those thinking of voting for Reform but who remain unsure, the lack of experience in government is a factor. This is super interesting data collected by Ipsos Mori last autumn. As you can see, Reform is well ahead in understanding the problems facing Britain, on 42%. But Labour still edge Reform out when it comes to being, quote, fit to govern. Super interesting. So Reform well ahead in understanding where the average Brit is at, but people don't feel like they're ready to go. Those 2 data points explain exactly why Farage has welcomed the likes of Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick and Nadim Zahawi onto the Reform benches, and it's also why he's announced his new shadow cabinet. Now let's take a look at this data from late last year. Again, super useful. 35% of soft Reform waverers who the party think they need to win a big majority. So maybe they don't need these guys to get a majority of 4 or 5 will be the largest party, but if you want a big majority, so you can do stuff, you're going to need to convince lots of these people. 35% of these people are concerned that Reform don't have any experience of running the country, and of course they don't. 26% claim they don't really have a plan for Britain beyond migration, which, let's be honest, is basically true. Kieran, this is a stunt. Farage is a political stuntman par excellence. They aren't really the shadow cabinet. There's only 4 of them. He's saying it's just the beginning. But I think it does show there's real intent from Reform, from Farage, to form the next government.
I would agree. And you're right, he's a stuntman par excellence. I think the big challenge for Reform, obviously, is that it's essentially a cult of personality. He says one-man band, I would say cult of personality, that has had an extraordinary meteoric rise in such a short space of time. And what that has done is brought in lots and lots of novices, political novices. I mean, he alluding to it himself there. It's brought in lots and lots of political novices who are riding in on the strength of Farage's coattails. The big challenge for Reform, and I think that there are parallels with MAGA, right, in this sense, is can they outlive their charismatic leader? And in order to do that, what they need to be able to do is institutionalise, is professionalise, is embed themselves in the social fabric, in society, in the political architecture. If they're able to do that, which, I mean, it should go without saying, I very much hope they can't, but if they're able to do that, then they will be able to grow beyond being what they are, by my reading right now, which is a cult of personality. And so I think that's the context out of which all of this is happening.
It's really important to say this is a difficult moment for Reform, right? Because you've got this energy as a populist party of the right. You're anti-establishment. You're anti the uni party. You're anti-elites. But you're also taking on a load of Tory has-beens, let's be quite frank. There are more people now who were in the Liz Truss cabinet on the Reform benches than in Kemi Badenoch's cabinet, shadow cabinet rather. Isn't that crazy? So to repeat, there are more individuals who are in Liz Truss's cabinet in government, a disaster, right? A dumpster fire of a government. More of those people are now on the Reform benches than in Kemi Badenoch's shadow cabinet. That sounds crazy. Why would you do that? Because, as I've said already, all the polling indicates that amongst people who would like to vote for Reform, but presently aren't sure, those don't knows, the lack of experience is a problem. Real tension there, right? You're a party of the populist right, but you also need some experience, some know-how, some credibility, some knowledge of how Westminster works. how the civil service works. Reform UK Shadow Cabinet announcement today came quick on the heels of news from another well-known right-winger. Just a few days ago, former Reform MP Rupert Lowe launched his own party, Restore Britain, with figures from the UK's far right quickly voicing their support. He also got the backing of the world's richest person, with Elon Musk posting this. Join Rupert Lowe in Restore Britain because he is the only one who will actually do it. I wonder, was that posted from California or Texas? That all came up at Nigel Farage's press conference this morning when a journalist from the Press Association put this question to him.
Your former colleague and friend Rupert Lowe has just launched Restore Britain. Are you feeling threatened at all by Restore Britain? And particularly now he's had the backing of Elon Musk, and it could split your vote.
I don't know about former friend. He sued me in 2019, as he sues everybody. And if you look at the history of Southampton Football Club, and then look at the history of WH Ireland, which he chaired in the city of London, you will see he was removed from both of those roles after lawsuits galore and 2 very dramatic EGMs. So friend would be stretching it just a little bit. There are, last time we counted, 11 parties that claim to be on the right or centre-right of British politics, from the Heritage Party to goodness knows who else. There is only one proper brand of centre-right politics in this country. It's called Reform. And as I'd mentioned earlier, people think, oh, Farage has done it. We'll just set a party up. It'll be marvellous. We'll sweep the next election. It just isn't as easy as that. Now, does he have a profile on X? Yes, he does. Is Elon going to support him? Probably. But you see, when he stood up and said that we've got to consider the mass deportation of entire communities, including those born in the United Kingdom, that just moves way beyond a point of reasonableness, of decency, of morality. And that was the moment at which, I realised we just had to get rid of him.
Kieran, there are 2 schools of thought on this, right? 2 interpretations. One is that you've got all these parties, he's right, by the way, there's loads of them. Restore, Homeland, of course, you've got the original, the OG, UKIP. You've got Advance UK with Ben Habib. The funny thing is, half these parties have been started by people who've fallen out with Farage. You've got all these parties. Now, one line of thinking might be that they're going to split the vote, right? You've got an Advance UK candidate, for instance, in Gorton and Denton, Nick Buckley. Another school of thought is that actually these people make Farage look more credible, more legitimate, because he can pose as the moderate, sensible, pragmatic figure that wants to address the challenges that many Brits care about, as we saw with that polling. 42% of people polled think that Reform understand where people are at in terms of their problems. They're responding to those issues, but also they're not as ideological, as dangerous, as extreme as these other organisations. So where do you fall on this? Are these organisations good or bad for Farage and Reform?
I think when you say something like splits the vote, it makes it sound like it's going to be an even split, or they're going to carve off a significant a portion of the would-be Reform electorate. I don't know about that, and I don't actually think that's very credible. But what I do think is, of those 2 options, it is more likely that Restore, under someone like Rupert Lowe, is damaging to Farage than that he is good for him. Now, I have no way of knowing. We're talking about the future, and we're talking about complex psephology, study of elections. And there's just no way of knowing what will happen in 2029, assuming that the election will be then. But that's a boring answer. So I would say ultimately, Rupert Lowe is probably the most credible far-right person. And then if you inject Elon Musk, as in, among people who are minded that way, he's probably far more credible than someone like Ben Habib. And when you inject Elon Musk's tens or hundreds of millions, or whatever it would be, obviously the Electoral Commission will have something to say, then it does become, I think, a more risky prospect for Farage. I'm not sure where I sit on the argument that they confer legitimacy on Farage among people who maybe wouldn't have voted for him otherwise. I think people who are willing or open to voting for Farage would have been regardless of whether a Restore Britain had emerged. But again, there's no way of solidly knowing that.
Do you not think it wins him brownie points, though, when he says, actually, I think that a brown or black person can be
It does.
British?
It definitely
And
does.
He's posing in a way that, if I was a 75-year-old Tory voter, I voted Tory all my life, I'd say, well, I can imagine a Tory backbencher saying that.
It definitely does. But my guess, Aaron, is that the people who are reflected in the polls now, giving Reform a huge lead, Farage was talking about how many weeks they've been ahead, are already counted in that. They were already persuaded that Farage, when he expelled Rupert Lowe, was expelling him for those reasons. I don't imagine that it will persuade people outside of those polling statistics. That's just my guess. I have no way of knowing. And of course, there will be marginal switches in that polling. But, a critical mass, we're talking about critical mass, winning votes and so on. My guess is that they're already ideologically sorted. I might be completely wrong on that. I would also say the thing you said a moment ago is absolutely right about the Tories. If he's looking to former Tories from the most chaotic period of British, post-Brexit, the Tories, we're focused on Starmer at the moment and his chaos, rightly so, because he's in government, he's incumbent. But we can't forget that post-2016, the Tories were, as you said, an absolute dumpster fire across several premierships, several governments. And so I think, although there is the veneer, the appearance of legitimacy in getting people like that into the party, he has to be very, very careful because they're jackals. And they're trained in the dark arts of the Tory party, which over the past 10 years has been notoriously regicidal and disloyal and treacherous. And so I think, it's a very risky strategy for him if what he's trying to do is instill order.
Yeah, Tories over the last 15 years make herding cats look like a simple feat. Another day, another humiliation for Keir Starmer's Labour government. In fact, we're now on the Prime Minister's 14th U-turn. Can you believe that? That's a little less than 1 month since Labour took power in July 2024. This one involves the government's controversial plan to delay local elections, set to be held in May. That's across 30 authorities across England. Except it turned out that 15 of them are in Labour-controlled areas, shown here, with a further 8 having no party with overall control, but having a Labour leader. Several of them were reform targets. Now, the government argued that the 30 councils, almost a quarter of all those eligible for local elections this year, had applied to delay their ballots because they're going to be reorganised. There's going to be a huge restructuring of devolved government in England. In January, local government secretary Steve Reed responded to the claim he was protecting at-risk Labour councils in Parliament.
To those who say we've cancelled all the elections, we haven't. To those who say it's all Labour councils, it isn't. I've asked, I've listened, and I've acted. No messing about, no playing politics, just getting on with the job of making local government work better for local people.
Well, that turned out to be complete rubbish, because the government's U-turn now means that 30 councils have been thrown into disarray after they've been told they'll face elections after all, and in less than 3 months. And worse, it's been an own goal for Labour, and one that's given Reform a major advantage, not that they needed it. That's because Reed's decision to U-turn on the postponement wasn't about democracy at all. It was about legal advice they received earlier this week saying that they'd be likely to lose in a High Court battle against the delay brought by, guess who, Reform UK. That was due to have been heard this Thursday. That hearing has now been cancelled. But while the government has escaped the humiliation of being forced into a climb down in the courts by Reform of all people, there's no victory for them to claim. That's because it shows that the government moved ahead with a policy denying a vote to over 4 million people in May's election before checking it was even legal. The government will also now pay Reform's £150,000 legal costs and provide an extra £63 million to the affected councils to help get those elections back on track. Councillors, though, are understandably annoyed. Jonathan Carr-West of the Local Government Information Portal told ITV why.
I think it's really reckless to be playing fast and loose with elections like this. They're not just something you can switch on and off and on and off again with no consequence. Not to mention for the political parties who will now be scrabbling around trying to find candidates to stand in these elections that they didn't believe was going to happen.
Honestly, this is shameful. I know we criticise Keir Starmer and Labour a fair bit on this show. We should do. They're the government. If they get something wrong, you criticise them. But this is really reckless, is the word. Other councillors have used more spicy language. This was Norfolk Tory councillor Kay Mason Billig speaking at a meeting earlier today.
I've never met him or spoken to him, but I know him to be a two-faced bully who doesn't care about Norfolk, who doesn't care about local government, and who doesn't even care about his own Labour councillors. I'd really like to quote Rick Mail at this point. What an utter bastard.
True. Steve Reed has cost so many Labour councillors their jobs. This guy was saying, build. He's wearing a stupid cap, by the way. Labour are building very few houses. Very few new construction starts this year, last year. He's making a tit of himself. He doesn't actually seem to have a grasp of the basics. Like, if we're going to suspend democracy, will it be legal or not? And remember, this was brought to you by the government, which was bringing competence back to the heart of government, led by a former director of public prosecutions. And in suspending democracy for 4.5 million people, they didn't check if they were breaking the law. Does make you wonder. Steve Reed was apparently not available for interviews today, so Care Minister Stephen Kinnock answered questions on the Today programme instead.
Doesn't it insult our listeners' intelligence to pretend that this was anything other than what it was? An attempt by Labour ministers to postpone inconvenient elections that you look set to lose because the opinion polls are against you.
No, it was a process of consultation with local authorities who said they were really going to struggle to make this happen. And that's why we've made £63 million available to actually facilitate this now and enable the changes to take place. There is also the key point around these zombie local authorities where you could potentially have had elections in May 2026 only to go through a reorganisation and have to have a completely different configuration and then have to have more elections in May 2027.
So if I could get hold of Steve Reed's WhatsApp messages,
look at that and say, is that really a good use of time and resources?
If I could get hold of the
money?
Secretary of State's WhatsApp messages, if I could put him on a truth drug, you're saying that never would it have crossed his lips or been written in a text, great, we're not going to have votes in places that we're going to lose to Reform UK.
I know Steve Reed well, and he is a guy that's always up for having a good democratic debate. And
well, where is he then?
He's always up for debate, except today when everybody is talking about him. He loves a good old Barney, yeah, except when he's going to be the one on the receiving end, it turns out. And by the way, have such stupid people ever sounded so competent before? Every time I hear these people from the Labour cabinet, Stephen Kinnock, Steve Reed, Liz Kendall, any of them, they sound so clubbable and competent, right? We've spoken to various stakeholders and there was a provisional statement and there was a programme and there was an entitlement and an endorsement and then we have a caveat, and a teenager would do a better job at quite basic things in terms of how to administer the country than these people. This extraordinary veneer of superficial competence over complete idiocy. It's extraordinary. Have such stupid people ever sounded so competent before? I can't think of it. Other Labour MPs are less than happy, though. This was Barry Gardiner on Channel 4 News.
But actually, this should have been timetabled properly. The resources should have been made available, because the worst thing of all is for a politician to look as if they're running scared from the electorate. And that's what it looked like.
And for the Prime Minister, whose main distinction was being a lawyer, to be given a legal lesson by Nigel Farage. I mean, it's humiliating.
Well, look, Christian, I can't disagree with you.
Look, Barry Gardiner is a very eloquent man, right? He's just there like, yeah, like the guy's a complete idiot. What can I say? He's a complete idiot. By the way, what does it tell you about this country that a former director of public prosecutions got schooled legally by Nigel Farage, a man who has a bottle of wine every day with his lunch? No wonder the country's in trouble. Of course, this is the government's second illegal humiliation in less than a week. That joins the High Court's de-prescription of Palestine action last Friday. Embarrassing stuff. Not for reform, though. They're celebrating.
But what I do think now is the Minister, Steve Reed, has clearly acted illegally, and given that the government has now given in, knew they'd lose to us in court, I think Steve Reed's question as a minister should now be debated.
The government have also said this afternoon they're going to be paying your legal fees. How much are your legal fees?
Zero now, because the government are going to pay them. So, yeah, we took a risk on this. We took a risk on this, but we knew it was the right thing to do. I thought we'd get a partial victory. I thought ones that were delayed for a second year in a row, we'd probably win that. But this is now a complete victory, and there'll be a lot of people up and down the country very grateful to us. Think about it. The Lib Dems were delaying in Cheltenham, the Conservatives delaying in Harlow and the other counties where they'd postponed last year as well. The rest of them were Labour, mostly in the north of England. It's a big win.
You know, Farage is kind of like Ancelotti. You know, when Ancelotti does the eyebrow thing, you're like, that's it, it's over. Real Madrid, they'd be 1-0 down with 3 minutes to go. He does the eyebrow and then that's it, right?
Yeah.
You're going to lose in injury time. And the minute reform and Farage gets the eyebrow, that's it. You're cooked. This is, I'm repeating myself, ridiculous. Keir Starmer was meant to be the adult in the room. He's been humiliated via the legal system by Nigel Farage and Reform, who, remember, by the way, are meant to be this fascist threat. They're going to subvert democracy. Labour and Starmer have allowed them to be the defenders of democracy for 4.5 million people.
Yeah, you mentioned Ancelotti. I can't think of a player or a manager who has facilitated so many own goals. It's unbelievable. More U-turns than Grand Theft Auto. And, at this point, it's starting to feel like we're picking low-hanging fruit. You referenced it a minute ago, Aaron. But what are we supposed to do? It's the government. It's the government of the day. And not only is it the government of the day, but listen to this litany. Before they came to power, they dropped £28 billion green investment, bankers' bonus cap, and plans to renationalise energy, water, and Royal Mail. Since they came to power, with an enormous mandate, 175-seat majority, they U-turned on two-child benefit cap, U-turned on winter fuel allowance, U-turned on income tax hikes, U-turned on digital ID cards, on the tractor tax or tax on farmland, waspy women, and now the local elections. And I know it's not a U-turn, but it's also worth mentioning, because it's in the same week as we said a moment ago, 10 million quid of public money wasted on unlawfully arresting young people in the context of Palestine action with their entire lives ahead of them, or pensioners, or all of us in between. And all I can conclude at this point is that this is a government that is terrified of its own shadow and is so rudderless that I can't even think of an apt way to describe what it's doing in the middle of lost in the middle of the sea. It's unbelievable.
I mean, I was going on TV, I was here, I was writing, I was saying that Starmer and Labour would be a disaster, right? Because the plan was, we're not the Tories and I have a nice haircut.
Right.
And even I had no idea it would be this crazy. This is crazy. And you're right, like, it feels like we're kicking somebody who's on the floor and they've been unconscious for 6 months, right? And they're inebriated and they can't fight back, and we're recording it, we're live streaming it, and we're sort of ritually humiliating them. This is the government. What else are we supposed to do?
There's nothing else.
And like you say, thousands of people arrested in regards to Palestine action, people facing as much as 6 months in prison for maybe having a T-shirt just with a logo on it. People were being questioned by the police for T-shirts saying Plasticine action. All of this was just actually, it had no legal basis. We have 4.5 million people potentially not getting a vote. Now they get a vote. Now all these parties have got to scramble to find candidates. This has never happened before. I know you were saying earlier, like how shambolic the Tory governments were before 2024. There's not been anything like this. I sound like a right-wing shock jock. I'm not being a right-wing shock jock. There's no precedent for a government this useless on everything. And by the way, on some of the macroeconomic policy, I like it, right? I think the budgets were okay. I think we need to increase taxes on some things in order to, have a more stable macro situation with regards to deficits. You can't just fund the welfare state through deficits. We need to fund things like the NHS and the care sector and local authorities. And it's great what they're doing on rail. And it's fantastic that housing with the MOD is no longer held by venture capitalists and private equity. That's been brought back in-house. That's all great. But they're screwing up so much. It's wild. And I think you have to be a real moron, by the way. You have to have a humiliation kink at this point if you're publicly defending Keir Starmer in the media. I feel so sorry for Labour canvassers. I feel so sorry for them. Labour still have many good people as activists and members and councillors and even MPs. I feel so sorry for them. They are all Barry Gardiner, right? What can you do? It's like, your wife's left you, your business collapsed, your best friend thinks you're an idiot, your kids hate you, your dog just died. There's nothing else can go wrong. That's what it's like now if you're Barry Gardiner. Kieran, any thoughts before we go to our next story?
My final thought would be, the things that you pointed to a moment ago that you said you liked. I'm sure that they're good things, and I don't dislike them either. But the problem is that it feels sporadic. It feels atomized. It feels that there has never been a joined up program for change or vision, because there hasn't been, because there is no ideology, there is no politics. And I've made this point before, but I think it's worth ending on. Someone like Thatcher or someone like Tony Blair, as far as I'm concerned, where I come from politically, their menace, their legacy is one of menace in many ways on British society. But what they understood very well was how to pick winners and losers in society and then back those winners and losers. Now, I think they picked the wrong winners and the wrong losers, right? But that was doing politics effectively. Keir Starmer has backed two cohorts only, I can see, since coming to power, or before that and in power. The kind of Westminster courtier press and big business interests. And that's it. No real people. No actual people in the electorate.
And that's his theory of politics, right? Politics is what does big tech think of me?
Right.
What do Google think of me? What does BlackRock think of me? And what does the BBC think of me? And that's politics. No, mate, it turns out there's this little thing called the electorate, right? And they genuinely thought they could bypass the electorate in terms of governing the country. They genuinely thought, and look, I can understand it to some extent. You have this huge majority. They thought it was 10, 15 years here. And it fell apart in 10, 15 months. Extraordinary.
I mean, there's been called, it's a Jew hunt. They're noting down who they think's Jewish, who's not Jewish in this area, and asking you, are you on our side or against that? I mean, why on earth is a campaign about Israel anything to do with a local election anyway?
That was Talk TV host Julia Hartley-Brewer suggesting that Jew hunts are taking place in Britain today and proving, once again, that Zionist cheerleaders love nothing more than terrifying this country's Jews. So what is this all about? Well, recently Sky News covered a Brighton door-knocking campaign that aimed at getting people to boycott Israeli products in response to the country's genocide in Gaza.
They split into small groups and head off to nearby streets.
We're trying to get as many people as possible to sign up.
Oh, so I can't eat hummus?
Well, you can eat hummus, but just not Israeli hummus.
The group says its aim is to put economic pressure on Israel.
This is a local campaign in Brighton to boycott, divest and sanction against Israel because of the treatment of Palestinians.
But they stand accused of sowing division.
Are you anti-Semitic?
No, we're anti-racist.
Anti-Zionist?
Yeah, sure.
You're anti-Zionist?
Yeah, because the Zionist ideology is an apartheid ideology in our view.
But can you understand why people would be uncomfortable if they dispute that view of you going door to door?
Well, I mean, people might feel uncomfortable, I suppose, but it's only a one-on-one conversation. We're very polite on the door.
If someone who's Jewish opens the door, that's going to be uncomfortable for them, isn't it?
Oh, we don't think so. It's no different from the actions of a political party like the Conservative Party or the Labour Party, who also go door to door and ask people how they feel.
Now, Sky did include the views of some Jewish people in Brighton in that piece who objected to the door-knocking campaign. Their reasons? They thought that Jewish people might be disturbed by the presence of the campaigners on their doorstep because they might believe that anti-Zionism was in fact a way of expressing anti-Semitism. Now, I don't believe that. I never have done, never will. But I'm not going to criticise a Jewish person for having that fear. I am, however, going to criticise those who appear to make up stories just to frighten people even more. Labour MP Peter Kyle told the Jewish News this. The moment I became aware of this campaign to door-knock residents under the banner of apartheid-free zone, I contacted the police and asked they investigate under the hate crime and the incitement laws which the government has recently brought in. My immediate thought was for the appalling scenario of a vulnerable Jewish resident. By the way, what is a vulnerable Jewish resident? What does that even, who is a vulnerable Jewish resident? What does that mean? I mean, does he mean, I don't know. Is that purely standpoint epistemology? We'll talk about that more in a moment. Being door-knocked by a gang of people wanting to harangue them. I mean, that would be bad, but that doesn't appear to be happening. It's an upsetting thought and should not be happening in 2026. Hove. Brighton and Hove Police have said they won't investigate, as there's no evidence of any criminal activity. Kind of how it's meant to work. And I think very sensible. Because what we're talking about here is a very classic boycott campaign, like the kind you saw in the 1980s regarding South Africa. And the campaign isn't just taking place in Brighton either. It's happening in other towns and cities too, including Bristol and Sheffield. And as they go about their perfectly legal campaigning, they appear to be getting harassment. This footage was posted from Sheffield.
I'm only asking people to boycott Israeli goods.
Okay, so you're actually what's your hat symbolise?
My hat symbolises a melon.
Watermelon.
A watermelon in support of the Palestine people.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, look at
But you're knocking on doors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Asking people to show their support for Palestine.
And if they don't,
We just go away and say
you go
sorry.
away. Do you take a
Thank you
note
very
of the door?
No. Well, we're taking note of doors that we've knocked on, but we don't put anything down.
I see. So
Just
you're
we don't
taking
do
a
it
note
again.
of doors you've
No.
knocked on.
Only so
and
that
the
we don't
ones
do
you
it
don't
again.
do it again, what kind of answers would they give that you don't knock on their door again?
Some of them say yes, some of them say no, some of them say I'll think about it.
And which doors don't you knock on? The Jews or the Jew supporting
We do
people?
knock on everybody's door.
Yeah, and the
whoever
ones
they
who,
are.
and you're telling me that there are some doors you don't knock on again. Which doors are they?
We don't knock on doors.
So you record the ones that give you an answer that is against your politics, is that right?
We record, we say no answer, or not interested, or supportive.
So you're not interested ones then?
Yeah.
You're making a note of those addresses?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what you're doing. You are Jew
No,
hunting.
but we're saying that we
you
won't
are
go there
Jew
again.
hunting.
They're not Jews, most of them.
Psycho! Fruitcake! You're on a campaign, you're knocking on doors. This gentleman, he's wearing a hat that looks like a watermelon. By the way, 90% of the population has 95% of the population has no idea of what that politically symbolises. Okay? Normal people, not on X all day, have no idea what that means. It's just a red hat. Okay? There's a campaign here. You might agree or disagree with it. Doesn't matter. This is a free country for now. There's a campaign here to inform people about a certain political perspective on Israel and a certain political series of actions, i.e. boycott of consumer goods from that country. These are all things which are perfectly tenable with other countries. We've done it many times in the past. We'll do it in the future. You can trace it all the way back to the Confederate States, actually, in the 1860s, in the 1850s even, maybe in this country, with Lancashire factory workers. So it's a very long history. It happens with other places, but the second you do it with Israel, you get called all kinds of names. It's a Jew hunt. You're collecting data because presumably at some point in the future they'll be rounding people up. I have no idea. This is just some old dude who is angry at the fact that tens of thousands of people have been killed, at least. We've all seen the pictures of children maimed, murdered, who died in ICUs because the hospitals didn't have electricity. Imagine if that was your child. Your child was born prematurely, but it was otherwise perfectly healthy, and there literally wasn't power in the ICU to keep them alive. How would you feel? How would you feel? I know how I'd feel if that was my daughter. I would want to seek revenge for the rest of my life. That would be the single thing that infuses my life with meaning. And what this man is doing peacefully is saying, let's try and avoid future scenarios like this through democratic civil means, through forms of democratic debate and protest and action, like boycotts. Now, other footage of the interaction between the door knockers and the people following them has also been posted that appears to show scuffles taking place. Obviously, we don't know the circumstances of that or even if it's real. South Yorkshire Police say they're investigating with the neighbourhood police team inspector and saying this. I'm aware that videos about yesterday's incident in Woodseats are circulating on social media and that some of these may have been edited. Our officers are working hard to understand the full circumstances. I know that residents may be concerned, and I would like to reassure you that our officers have been in the area over the weekend and will be back today to provide reassurance to the community. If you have any concerns, please speak to them. They are there to support you. We have since received a report of a religiously motivated assault in relation to this incident. A woman has reported being assaulted by 2 men. Inquiries are ongoing. So police are making quite proper inquiries into possible physical confrontations between 2 groups of people. But there's no suggestion that the actual door-knocking campaign is in any way breaking the law. Not in Sheffield, not in Brighton, not in Bristol. In fact, several Green Party leaders have, in the past, praised this very campaign. And that's prompted other senior political figures to get involved too, with the government's anti-Semitism advisor, John Mann, posting this. The Green Party across the country are knocking doors, asking people to stop Jewish people being able to buy kosher food made in Israel. Meanwhile, the same week, the far right demand no halal or kosher food. By the way, somebody on the right or on the left is allowed to campaign against kosher or halal food. I don't agree with it. I don't understand. Are we gonna prohibit that by law? How does this work? And by the way, who's saying Jewish people shouldn't be able to buy kosher food? Show me one clip of people who are pro-Palestine saying that. One clip. And by the way, the definition of kosher food is not food that's from Israel. I don't know what John Mann's insinuating there. Kieran.
John Mann and Peter Kyle and everyone like them who spent so many years manufacturing a false anti-Semitism, moral panic, in the build-up to ultimately what became the worst genocide of the 21st century in Gaza. All of those people ought to hang their heads in shame, were it not in addition for the fact that they have watched the same abominable scenes as the rest of us unfold in Gaza. Babies killed, innocent people killed, the disabled killed, the elderly killed, more amputees per capita in Gaza than any other place on earth. More 50% of children in Gaza want to kill themselves, want to commit suicide. These people manufactured consent for this situation in Gaza. And yet, rather than seeing that and thinking, I have to hold my head in mortal shame for the rest of my existence, they still have the gall to tell us that we ought to be ashamed for not thinking that Israel is some innocent party, that we ought to be ashamed because we're closet anti-Semites. How utterly stupid and cowardly, frankly, do they think that we are? And, look, I'm always at a loss to know, Aaron, whether to talk about my family or not in this context, but I'm going to do it on this occasion. It's not academic for me. My sister was shot by Israeli police. My brother was put in prison at 12. My grandfather was shot in the head. My uncle was murdered. But the guy's wearing a watermelon hat. He's wearing a watermelon hat. It's just unspeakable. And all of these people, as I say, they helped create the context in which Gaza happened with their false moral panics and their straw men. And yet here they are still polluting the airwaves, trying to do the same 2.5 years into the worst genocide of the 21st century.
I mean, there is a connection there, right, between what's happened in Gaza and the puerility and the stupidity of this kind of stuff. So as I understand it, 3,000 to 4,000 kids have lost one or both legs in Gaza since October 2023. It is the single largest cohort of children who've seen leg amputations in recent history.
Right.
Right. I mean, this is just enormous. We're not talking about now people who've died or been disfigured. This one thing. The idea that a child, 1, 2, 3, 4, loses a leg or both legs, can never walk, I can't think of anything more upsetting, actually. And it makes perfect sense to me, after thinking about this for a great deal of time, as I'm sure we all have, it makes perfect sense to me that if you were advocating for the very people who'd done that, of course you would focus on ridiculous things, because what else are you going to do? The alternative is you say, okay, I defended evil, right? What else are you going to do? So they're having to reach for ever more ridiculous things, like people are peacefully trying to coordinate a boycott campaign of Israeli goods, and these people find themselves basically insinuating this guy is like, you know, German National Socialist in the 1930s because he's wearing a watermelon hat. That's the insinuation, right? You're keeping the details of who says yes and no on what doors because you're going to do Kristallnacht or something. That seems to be the insinuation. Maybe I'm wrong. Right. And she's saying after that, Jew hunter, right? And I think you probably, to make sense of your choices and what you have defended, which is, like I say, the largest cohort of children who've lost one or both legs in modern times, you probably have to do that to stay sane, I imagine.
Right. I think that's an incredibly important point, and I'm really glad you've made it, because what we tend to do, those of us that like analysis, we tend to focus on the material realities, the economy, the social, political benefits to Western leaders in supporting Israel's genocide, the capitalistic element to it, and so on. But I actually think that that's an incredibly important point. The psychological aspects around those who support the most appalling evil that human beings are capable of are real. And someone who talks very eloquently about this, not in the context of Palestine, was James Baldwin. He talked about the psychology of white supremacy and the kind of damage to the psyche of the individuals that find themselves espousing it on behalf of a system, and almost loan themselves out as vessels for what is evil. And I really believe very firmly, and I think actually you see this with the hunger strikes and with the government's response to Palestine action. Once you're knee deep or neck deep in a genocide, and it's clear that increasing numbers of people realize that that's what you have participated in, it is much easier for the guilty parties often to double down, to say, no, we're not bringing those bodies up. Absolutely not. We will not look our sins in the whites of their eyes. We cannot do that. We will collapse. Because in the end, they were at least people before they were monsters. And so I think that's an incredibly important point. It is much easier often for the guilty parties to double down and double down and double down again than fess up to the extent to which they have allowed themselves to be pawns of evil.
You've got three options, right? Either you publicly recant and you say, actually, and I'm not trying to moralize, I mean, that's kind of what they're doing, right? Some people I've met have said, this was my position before, it's now changed. But of course, that has high social costs.
Right.
Especially if you're British Jew and your family is a Zionist, pro-Israel. So some people feel like that, but then don't publicly say it, which is kind of, and he's not Jewish, but what Wes Streeton was saying to Peter Mandelson, right?
Right.
This is war crimes, this is a genocide, what can we do? And there are lots of conversations like that happening, right? Way more than I think people realize, including on the right. Because of course, for people on the right, there are very, very high costs for condemning Israel. And then you've got that third category, which is, again, a pretty large number of people who've just basically doubled down on genocide denial and championing war crimes. And I think I would actually include many, many people in the British media in that, which is kind of, it's not surprising, but it's still shocking.
You see, final thought on this, Aaron, but it is a fascinating discussion. You see that replicated in the conversations about empire, frankly, part of the reason that we don't talk about empire properly in this country and in France as well is because there is such an enormous, a leviathan scale of guilt lying just beneath the surface for all who believe in national, the national story or the formal narrative, the official narrative. As soon as you start to, it's like looking at the sun. As soon as you start to acknowledge that, it risks being all-consuming or overwhelming, I think, because there's such an enormous amount of guilt over several centuries to go around. And I think that explains a lot of post-colonial, people say post-colonial guilt, and they say it usually from the right to criticize post-colonial guilt and say, why do we have post-colonial guilt? I mean, it was our grandparents, it was our great-great-grandparents. The way I think post-colonial guilt operates, and it's relevant to Gaza as well, is that actually people turn their guilt into anger. They say, fuck you. I'm not going to accept that. You're to blame. You're to blame. I've never had any, it's nothing to do with me, blah, blah, blah. That's how guilt tends to manifest or operate most commonly around those kinds of questions in the real world. And that, I think, is what's going on to an extent here as well.
You're half French. When people say, why is he saying France? I mean, that's partly why. We've got a super chat from Dean Robertson with £10. Given how much illegal stuff Lammy and Cooper got up to for Starmer, I don't know what that's in reference to. I presume that's talking about Labour Together and so on. I don't know. I mean, Labour Together, that's obviously an ongoing story. To be clear, Lammy and Cooper, illegal stuff, I don't know what they've done. Got up to for Starmer, maybe you mean support of Israel, involvement in war crimes.
Maybe they mean the designation as a terror group of Palestine Action, given that it's been ruled unlawful. It's just a guess.
That's not illegal, though.
No, it's unlawful, I guess.
Yeah, they're different things.
Yeah.
They must be feeling slightly exposed, given how close he seems to imploding. I think their political reputations, most certainly. I would say on Lammy, in terms of illegality, Lammy was the foreign secretary for loads of this, and Britain, while he was foreign secretary, was aiding and abetting a genocide. I mean, it's genuinely possible this man at some point responds to this quickly, at some point meets with legal consequences for his actions.
I think so. I don't think it will happen anytime soon. And I think it will only happen when and if, let's say, Israel collapses as it exists presently, which is to say an apartheid ethno-state practicing genocide. If those contradictions become so sharp that the state of Israel cannot continue as an ethno-state and it collapses in on itself, and there's the sort of shifting scenery in the international system and so on, power relationships, who knows? Before the guy, how old is David Lammy? He's in his late 50s, is he?
Yeah, I think so.
So it's plausible. It's plausible.
I mean, even just short of that, if there was a major regional war and Israel did some pretty screwed up stuff, I mean, I don't know. I mean, the contradictions of supporting all of this are obviously coming to the fore and have been for several years. Let's go to Vegan Barnsley, 15, with £19.99. Thank you, Vegan Barnsley, 15. Respect, Kieran, bless you, never give up. Very true, never give up.
Very kind.
And just for people who are watching, if you like our work here at Novara Media, if you want to support our work going into the future, both short, medium, and long term, go to novara.media/support or novaramedia.com/support. Help us build a new media for different politics. We have had a tremendous start to the year. We had an event last night, 500 people, for the launch of Ash Sarko's paperback book. We have had amazing shows, I think it's fair to say, since we've had the two-header in the studio. We're moving studios soon. We have a tremendous team making us what we are. We go from strength to strength, all because of our supporters. If you think we need a new politics in this country, you're on board with where we're going. We think a necessary precursor is a different kind of media. You can't have that different politics without different kind of media. If you agree, go to novaramedia.com/support. The link is in the description below. She might not be associated with transparent government and taking on special interests in power, but Hilary Clinton has weighed in on the Epstein affair. Speaking to the BBC, she said this.
You say you never met Jeffrey Epstein. Clearly your husband did know him. The former president says he knew him before his crimes came to light. But there are also associations with Ghislaine Maxwell, including in 2013 when she was a guest at a Clinton Global Initiative event, years after allegations had emerged against her. What I want to know is, do you regret the links that there have been between Epstein, Maxwell and the Clinton family?
Well, let me start by saying that a law was passed in Congress to require that all the files that have anything to do with them be released. And what we're seeing, I think it's fair to say, is a continuing cover-up by the Trump administration. In fact, when the Attorney General testified last week, it was quite a scene because she refused to answer questions. She diverted attention away from the matters at hand. She refused to look at the survivors. So there's something about this administration's attitude toward this, which I think really leads us to conclude they have something to hide. We don't. We have been willing to say whatever we know. We've even done it under oath. But they want us to testify, not everyone else who's mentioned many, many times, hundreds of thousands of times in these files. So we've said, fine, let us do it in public. And we will appear in public and we'll answer all your questions.
And we'll get to that in just a moment. But just to be clear, do you regret the links that there have been?
You know, we have no links. We have a very clear record that we've been willing to talk about, which my husband has said. He took some rides on the airplane for his charitable work. I don't recall ever meeting him.
Did you ever meet Ghislaine Maxwell?
I did on a few occasions, and thousands of people go to the Clinton Global Initiative. So it to me is not something that is really at the heart of what this matter is about. They are accused, and in both cases were convicted of horrific crimes against girls and women. That should be the focus. And we are more than happy to say what we know, which is very limited and totally unrelated to their behavior or their crimes. And we want to do it in public because let's make this transparent. The survivors deserve that. The public deserves that. But, you know, the Republican member of Congress who is running this hearing or this investigation is trying to protect the president. So let's get to what's really at stake here.
That's pretty extraordinary, what she's saying, right? She is, perhaps accurately, by the way, alleging that Trump is mentioned many, 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 many times. We don't know how many. And by the way, this doesn't come from nowhere. As I discussed with Richard Saunders last week, that interview can be found on our YouTube channel. Virginia Giuffre was working at Mar-a-Lago when she met Ghislaine Maxwell and, by extension, Jeffrey Epstein. She met them at Mar-a-Lago, you know, the place that's owned by Donald Trump. What did you make of that? It does feel like she's actually going on the offense a bit. So partly, I mean, it's ridiculous. She's saying, yeah, I knew Ghislaine Maxwell, so what? I knew loads of people. She went to your daughter's wedding. Okay, that's not loads of people. That's quite a close relationship. She went to your daughter's wedding. But also, I mean, that going on the offensive, I wonder where that comes from, right? Because ultimately, Trump is still the president.
Yeah. I want to read you something quickly, Aaron. Please indulge me. It's brief. Quote, "The great story here, for anybody willing to find it and write about it and explain it, is this vast right-wing conspiracy that has been conspiring against my husband since the day he announced for president." That was Hilary Clinton on the 27th of January, 1998. And it was about Bill Clinton's affair with 22-year-old Monica Lewinsky. The day before that, on January 26th, Bill Clinton went on national television and said, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman." 6 months later, in July 1998, and I'm sorry this is a bit graphic, but I think it's important, Bill Clinton, we found out the truth only because Monica Lewinsky turned over to the FBI a blue dress with Bill Clinton's semen on it. It's the only reason we know that. Hillary and Bill Clinton are partners in deception. They are partners in deception par excellence. Anybody who wants to know more about this, there's a good book by somebody who turned out to be quite a bad man, but it's a brilliant book by Christopher Hitchens called The Triangulations of William Jefferson Clinton, No One Left to Lie To. Were the Republicans in the 1990s fixated on Bill Clinton? Yes. Did that prove that he was up to no wrongdoing and that he wasn't lying about it? Demonstrably not. Are the Republicans fixated on Bill Clinton now? No. They've got no reason. They've got no material reason to be. In the 1990s, the Republicans led by Newt Gingrich were obsessed with Bill Clinton because he was a powerhouse. He was an electoral force. That's why. I don't want to get sued. The Clintons are very, very powerful people. But what we know about this, to bring it into the present, is that Bill Clinton went on Jeffrey Epstein's private jet, the so-called Lolita Express, between 17 and 27 times from 2000 to 2003. She says, it was for his charity work. Why? The Clintons are fabulously wealthy. They've been fabulously wealthy since the 1990s. Why did he need to go between 17 and 27 times on the Lolita Express, so-called?
It's a perfectly good question and something I think she should be asked, frankly. Clinton went on to say this.
Just on this hearing, and obviously I'm sure Donald Trump and his administration would reject your characterisation of what's going on, and he's denied
How
any
can they
wrongdoing.
reject it? They can't answer questions, and the Attorney General was clearly unwilling to answer questions. She works for him. So let's be very clear here. According to what we now know, Mr. Trump, President Trump, is mentioned, some say, 1 million times in the files. People in his cabinet are mentioned.
That figure's correct?
That's what it says, on the internet over and over again. So let's find out what the truth is. That's why we want it to be transparent and in public.
We had QAnon, now we've got BlueAnon. That's what they say on the internet over 1 million times. I mean, he's mentioned a hell of a lot of times, that's for sure. Kieran, is there a cover-up going on?
I think that Trump has, I'm always worried about getting us sued. I think that Trump has protected Bill Clinton so far. I think the files that have been released, which by some, do you see Channel 4 says they think it might be 2% of all of the data that 2% of all the data that exists on this. I think that Trump is protecting Bill Clinton because virtually nothing has come out, and yet we know that he spent such an extensive amount of time with Epstein. We don't know that he was on the island, that's true, but we do know that he was flying around the world with him or on his jet. So no, I mean, if there is a cover-up, it's a cover-up to protect Bill Clinton, not to implicate him.
Yeah, that's the really interesting thing for me, is that actually both of these men have a lot to lose, which makes Hillary Clinton's intervention all the stranger. Today is, of course, Shrove Tuesday, which is the day before Ash Wednesday. And that's the start of Lent, a period of reflection, fasting, which lasts for 7 weeks and culminates at Easter. Now, normally people will give something up for Lent. Even secular people will do that. And the point of Shrove Tuesday, or Pancake Day, as it's known in the UK and some other places, is to eat all the rich food you'll be abjuring from, you'll be denying yourself over the next 40 days. So milk, butter, sugar, eggs, you get pancakes. Historically, this was a world without refrigeration. This was stuff that you weren't going to eat. Enjoy yourself. Be a little bit gluttonous for the day. And while you might take confession on Shrove Tuesday, and yes, technically it's the end of something called Shrovetide, it's basically the day before something big. It's the pre-event, so to speak. It's the warm-up act. It's about pancakes. Keir Starmer appears to be unsure about that, though. He posted this on X. Wishing a happy Shrove Tuesday to everyone who is celebrating. Rooted in Christian tradition, today is an opportunity to reflect on the values that bring us together. And outside Downing Street, you have two chefs tossing pancakes. Kieran, this might seem like a puerile story, and in some ways it is. In some ways it is, but I think this says a lot about Keir Starmer. Firstly, he's not religious, whatever, but he's saying about the values that bring us together. So it's a guy who's not even a Christian, and most Brits aren't Christians. It's a guy who's sort of appealing to Christian norms, referring to a day which isn't even really about Christian norms, about pancakes. And for me, this gets to the heart of the kind of superficiality and the vacuity of centrist politics. I swear to God, every day I go on X, all of these guys, Peter Kyle and Keir Starmer and Liz Kendall, they're celebrating a new day. Diwali, Nowruz. I'm half Iranian, all right? Don't start anything. Nowruz, Iranian New Year. Or maybe they don't do that one. It's a bit too, geopolitically sensitive. Every day it's a new day. The day I never see celebrated by Labour politicians, certainly not by the Labour Prime Minister, is, of course, International Workers' Day. Funny that. What do you make of this fetish for celebrating days and posting graphics on social media about new festivities I learn about pretty much every week, actually, I must say?
Well, in matters of theology, Catholic theology, I come to you, Aaron. So I trust you when you say Pancake Day doesn't have strong religious significance. I think you've touched on the nub of it, really. It points to the kind of vacuousness and the kind of retreat into a paint-by-numbers representative politics, rather than actually setting yourself the difficult task of trying to improve the material conditions of people's lives, which used to be what politics was supposed to be about. I'm not saying it always was. There's always been froth and bubble. There's always been superficiality and so on. But it seems to be all that Keir Starmer can muster these days. So it's a kind of depoliticisation of public life almost. And that's what's so bloody depressing about it, is when it's coupled with a lack of material improvement and a lack of material seriousness. If Keir Starmer were transforming the country into a social democratic or democratic socialist, modern industrialised utopia, eradicating all sorts of social ills, I'm sure we'd be fine with whatever nonsense, froth and bubble, paint-by-numbers, representative politics rubbish he wants to put out. But it's when that sort of seems to fill an outsized amount of space that you start to think, ugh, give me a break.
It's politics as punditry, right? That's the thing now. I see so many politicians who seem to think their job is punditry.
Right.
They'll go on LBC and they'll pontificate about this or that. And I'm thinking, well, hold on, you've got Nick Ferrari for that. You don't need to do that. I don't need the Prime Minister to talk about Pancake Day. How it brings us together. A Labour Prime Minister, these are the inheritors of people that built this country's Labour movement and a political party that's meant to represent that Labour movement. They went through horrors to get the 8-hour day, to get the weekend, an extraordinary story. And now their latter-day descendants are some of the most vacuous, and as we've seen with other stories today, incompetent people imaginable. Kieran, we've already talked about our favourite pancake fillings. Thanks for joining me this evening.
Off we go to have our pancakes. Thank you for having me, Aaron.
And thank you, everyone, for watching tonight. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.